Anyway, welcome to the Changing Times presents the Otherworldly, the show for the conference. This is, I'm Chippa Khan, I'm the host, and tonight my guest is going to be J. Michael Clark. What do you like being called? Michael?
You can call me Jay, you can call me J. Michael, and on my video there, it's got my skating name, which is Shale.
Okay, great. And please put anything of interest in the chat room. Introduction, he has developed a technique that tonight he's going to show us. He reads cards by including multiple decks. Very cool, but not just tarot. Various oracle ones and divination cards and other cards, like I think he said flashcards. He also does healing, and he is an artist, and I spent about a half an hour falling into his Facebook pictures. It's like, oh my gosh, beautiful. He's a technomage, and he does art therapy, and I think this came out of his art therapy. The art therapy tools go through many forms of our brain communication, unconscious and unconscious dialogue. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and inner voices cannot speak, but relate to the pictures. So he has done this with over 20 or more decks over his entire floor. And so this is, which I think he is primarily used for healing himself, but also others. The quote is the reflection of our soul's wave in multiple cards in imageries. Just wonderful. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. This is going to be cool, and I will no doubt plunge in and tell and ask questions, because I can't seem to help myself. Reminding people who are joining us to mute yourselves, and you can certainly unmute yourself if you have a question, or if you want to, you can put the question in the chat room, and I guess that's it. So, oh shit, good name. You see, I am playing with frivolousness this year. Okay, where is the, let's pin you to the, so everybody can see you. Yay. So, yes, take it away, J. Michael or Shale or whoever, and tell me about this, because I'm really excited.
All right, so for myself, first I'll show off all the different cards that I have here. I started, can I do this? All right. As you can see, I have several different kinds of decks. There's oracle decks, there's divination decks, I Ching. I have several different forms, sacred geometry. And mainly it started out when I was in college and studying art therapy. My first tarot deck was the Cosmic Tarot, and it was mainly for curiosity of, can I actually divine the future with it? And what I found was that my subconscious mind kind of put that aside and said, I need to talk to you consciously, because there's some inner demons, inner issues, dialogue that I wasn't able to work through on my own. But by using the cards, they're able to give voice to certain things in our mind that we have no other way to give them a voice. And so after this deck, I started looking at decks differently, as in each artist that creates their decks are creating those decks out of their subconscious. And that's how we all communicate. We communicate through our subconscious, whether it be through body language, through the way that we dress, the way that we present ourselves. And cards are the same way. So not only is this the subconscious of the people who created the art, but that also means it'll connect to me on that level as well. And I found that certain cards will either connect to voices of either depression or anger or anxiety, or it can relate to people in my life, such as certain decks will remind me when I look at them, the way that they are presented. Oh, this reminds me of this individual because they're very floral, and it's a very floral deck. Or this deck reminds me of this particular individual because they're very stern. I have one deck that's an adult deck, and that's for whenever I have questions about intimacy and relationships on a sexual fashion. So for me, tarot isn't just for divination, it's for working with our minds. And a lot of us don't know how to kind of communicate with ourselves. And that's part of the frustration as a human being, is that we have all this stuff going on in our head, but how do you bring it out? How do you make it contextual, that you can work with it, that you can to understand it, to have a reflection that isn't just etheric in your mind's eye, but more physically tangible and tactile. And that's what I tend to use the cards for. Any questions so far?
I'm reminded of, I've always had trouble, this is going to sound unrelated, but walking a labyrinth.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I was walking a labyrinth and started noticing the various herbs, and I'm an herbalist. And suddenly there was plantain, and there was clover, and there was all these old friends.
Mm-hmm.
I had a life-altering experience walking the labyrinth once I made that connection.
Correct.
The
Correct.
symbols that talk to this gives you symbols to talk.
Correct. So since there's symbols to talk, if you want a kind of an example of how I can use them, I know for this evening, I don't have any specific, like, oh my gosh, questions that I need to work through. But I do know that through this particular season, it was a little bit of a dark ride for me. I think it's just because of the environment of COVID. I think it's just the environment of how we've been being isolated as we have. And so I know I went through a lot of darkness, and that as we're going towards the lighter time of the year, it's helping me feel better. But now I'm at this loss of, what do I kind of do with all this dark, heavy matter that I had to kind of plow through this winter? And yet, where do I go from there? So one of the things that come to mind is a deck that I happen to have. It's called the Spirit Within Tarot. And the main reason that I'm choosing that for this particular point is because what's unique about this particular deck is that all the cards have their imagery done in a shadow silhouette. So that kind of relates to the darkness that I kind of went through the winter holiday. And so, since that's one of the things that I need to kind of work with, and that's one of the voices in my head that was really heavy, I would literally just shuffle like you do with any cards, and I just allow the cards to speak to me. I don't kind of try to force them to tell me anything. And again, they'll either, you'll know when to feel which ones to kind of pull out, which ones not to. And so far, 3 of the ones that have come out: the Knight of Cups, the Fool, and the 10 of Pentacles, which, when I place them out, it kind of makes sense, because I was kind of being very foolish in my own mind about being on the cliff's edge and having the thoughts that I had. And I do have to admit the imagery is kind of appropriate, since with the dog trying to keep the Fool grounded, if it wasn't for my animals, I don't know that I would be able to get through this winter. But that's also, as the 10 of Pentacles, when you look at its imagery, you can see again, one single person with the animal that I feel that was me as I got through the winter. And then I was concerned about those around me who they're in a family unit. And then again, social distance, this card is perfect that the people behind me are in a social distance and it's a small family. And I was concerned about them more than I was myself. So that kind of makes sense in that light. And as for the Knight of Cups, another thing that happened to be a good portion of my winter was really exploring teas. I happen to be very affectionately drawn towards teas because they bring emotion, memory, they help me through my day and nutrition. So even though I went through the darkness, apparently I went through it in a balanced enough of a way. But I have another deck called the Mirror Cards, which is also a really interesting deck because they're more abstract and they actually have a card with a mirror in it for you to actually reflect on, which is really cool. But this deck happens to have more geometrical shapes and colors, but they also have on the bottom printed words such as freedom, humor, things of that nature. So since they have simple, quick little clips of words, it's one of the things that, well, what direction do I want to go forward? I see that I've gotten through the darkness of it, but where do I want to go forward in my own self-reflection? And we'll see where that one takes me next. Oh, quite a few jumped out. Okay. The cards that came up were nurture, aloneness, self-worth, and sexuality. Which, when I look at what's already placed down, and this is where it starts getting into a tablet.
Before you, what was the name of that deck?
Oh, sorry, that deck was called the Mirror Cards.
Mirror.
And yes, the Mirror Cards.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. Then what happens is I'll look at the deck as it's placed down, and then with the new cards, I can kind of place where it is I feel they relate to the information that I already have, which I feel I do need to nurture more, that maybe sexuality is something that I need to be concerned about in one way or fashion or the other. Self-worth and aloneness were definitely a situation that I contemplated myself. And I also noticed that I wanted to put the nurture above the shadow deck. And in doing so, that also lets me know that my higher goal was to nurture myself through that darkness, even though I was questioning my self-worth, even though I was questioning my aloneness. And I believe the sexuality may not be actual sexuality, but relationship, communication, being able to have that connection. Because we talked about during COVID how bubbles work. And that's kind of how our sexuality in our relationships work, where they're in little pods and so forth. And I know through the darkness of the shadow of this winter, those are things that I was going through. You know, the lack of having that relationship, the lack, questioning how alone I am and whether I'm okay with being alone. Being that I was an only child, I can relate to being alone better than most people, but it still had an issue with myself. And of course, there was the question of self-worth, because whenever you're not around enough people and you're not getting enough nurturing, it makes you question where you are, and because we as a species are very sociable. We're social creatures, and it's very much what this virus likes is the fact that we're social. So we've kind of had to fight our own natural instincts on that. That's kind of bizarre. I'm still not happy with where I need to go, where I need to feel. So I'm going to go and open up another deck called Vision Quest. This one has more of a Native American flair, and it is about doing a vision quest with this deck so that you can figure out your vision, where to go. And it's also set up very stereotypically like a tarot deck card with water and earth and air and major arcana and so forth, but in a Native American kind of feel. Because I really think that the cards so far are just telling me things I've kind of either dealt with or I've kind of gone through or that I'm dealing with. But I kind of want some more solutions as to where to go forward. Okay, all right, you're talking. Okay, what do we got? Ooh, okay. All right. Let me see. I'm thinking maybe one more. There. Oh, interesting. Okay, one more, sorry. I'm not getting the clarification that I need. Wow, okay. All right, so with this deck, I pulled up the Daughter of Water, the Son of Water, the Ace of Water, and the Seven of Earth. Now, 3 of the cards are all focused on water and male and female energy, which I tend to do quite a bit with myself there. And the Seven of Earth is about depletion, which, again, I kind of had talked to my therapist about this, about some of the voices that have gone through my mind through this winter. And I didn't know that there was a title for what I had been going through. And my therapist said, you're going through what's called chronic compassion fatigue. Well, that would explain the depletion card, because I just felt in the most darkest of my winter that I was completely depleted, dead of all. I just didn't want to participate. I didn't want to leave this realm, but I just didn't want to participate because I was so depleted. But what my therapist had also talked about, and this ties into the upper card of nurture, when I think of nurturing, water definitely comes to mind, because when I take a bath, when I take a shower, that very much, one, washes away a lot of negative energy, dead skin, dead cells, but it also replenishes, it nourishes, it brings about life. Water is life. And I'm also working with the flow of my life. Strangely enough, I bought an instrument called the Akai Force, which is a synthesizer, and they talk about your workflow. How do you work with the flow of the music you're creating? So having the Ace of Water is a good idea that as I go forward, there's going to be a lot of nurturing with the music therapy I'm going to be doing, that there should be a flow, a release of emotion that was kind of what I needed, because I wasn't being nurtured well enough.
Where does it?
Well, I'm putting them, let's see.
The placement seems so important because, you know, most of us are used to simple layouts, which you follow the predetermined pattern.
And that's a good kind of statement, that I don't have a specific pattern. Like before we started the interview, I was like, well, am I going to do a triangle? Am I going to do a square? Am I going to do a circle? How am I going to lay out the cards? But that's not how I work. I tend to listen to my mind, and in the moment, I'll place the cards where I feel they need to be. And as I'm working with this, I'm recognizing that this one's becoming very tableau, very, I started out in the center and now the cards are growing out in a particular circular or format. And it helps me again, as it comes into creation, how the creation itself of the cards and the way they're laid down then also helps in my interpretation of where it is in my mind. With this one, I started out with the center, knowing that I have the darkness that I'm dealing with. And then it seems that my brain and my subconscious are putting the things that are deeper and then in the darkness of my being below in the shadow. And then I feel comfortable with putting the things that are nurturing and of light above the shadow. And to me, that also makes sense in the fact that if this card down here is depletion, and it's of the earth, it's of the base of where I'm at that is so dry. And as I said, for me, in my world, when I shower, I start and I wash from my head down to my feet. So starting the nurturing of water by the nurture card at top would make sense, because then as I build it, then I also know within my mind is where I need to start with the flow. And as it goes through the chakras, as it goes through my being, as I digest it, I digest and go through the shadow of myself, and I can digest and acquire the knowledge of what it is that in the base of my being that I'm dealing with. So the shape can change dependent upon what your intuition tells you. If my intuition had told me to, like the ones that have gone like all over my floor, that one was because I was dealing with the family tree of my background. And it literally started out as a tree trunk. And then as the cards continued to lay out, they actually branched out into trees and into roots. And then therefore I can associate, well, how is that within my family tree? So this one's at least starting to help in giving me ideas of, okay, the music therapy that I have started with my instrument is a good enough start with the flow to balance out the masculine and feminine energies with myself, which may help with my that sense of depletion. Let me see.
We have a comment that says the configuration looks a lot like Sephiroth.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, and again, any extra knowledge helps in your interpretation as to what your brain or what your mind or subconscious may be trying to get your conscious to be aware of and think about. Let me see here. Oh, that's a good one to share. Hold on, let me get that deck. So one of the other things that I like about the cards I found was that there was this deck called Soul Cards. And this particular artist, what I like about her soul cards, she's got two decks. I only got the first deck. In her deck, she's a watercolorist. So she does a lot of water paintings and a lot of imagery that she bases, as she said, are either figures or faces. But what I like most about her work is that they're not a stereotypical tarot deck. She specifically made sure that there was no major arcana, minor arcana. Her whole purpose was she wanted a deck that was made from emotion, so that as you peruse through the different imagery, as you're relating or as you're drawn to a particular image, you pull that image up and you allow it to then bring about the concepts that you need to then deal with. So I like the fact that it was very non-discerning as normal tarot are. And I have to say that it's also nice because when you're working with this deck, if there is a specific voice in your head that doesn't use language or doesn't use music therapy or doesn't have another way to communicate, this particular deck is nice because it'll let those voices have that ability. Ooh, wow. So I pulled up one that looks like a happy sun, a figure that happens to have like a halo or a big hat or big hair, not sure. You can interpret that however you want. And then there's one where there are two individuals that seem to be spiraling within one another. Now, again, how that works for me at this point is that okay. So the way these three got laid in, where is it? There it is. I put the sun figure above the female water and the other water card. I put the individual with the halo-like figure beside these cards, the shadow and the male figure. And then this double card down by the depletion. Mainly because as I'm looking at them, this relates to depletion to me because I felt like it was a twofold. It wasn't just one specific thing that seemed to be depleting me. It seemed to be several things spiraling out of control. And yet at the same time, almost there was a focus in the depletion. Which also, yeah, well, I mean, let's face it, the previous administration was kind of draining. Just honest.
Another question.
Yes.
Actually, it's two questions. Do you pick decks based on intuition as well, or do you find yourself wanting to speak to specific elements of yourself and pick the decks accordingly? Oh, good question.
I would say it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. There are times where, again, since I have so many decks, I can throw out a question to my mind and be like, is there any deck or voice in my head that needs to speak that I am willing to hear? And then
so laying out your collection of decks is a part of the process.
Yes, because even though, well, and that's more on the intuitional. If it's intuition, I'll lay out all the decks, and then I will ask, okay, which deck wants to speak that I'm willing to hear in that moment, and then I will intuitionally pull those decks forward. If it's a specific question on a specific person, like I know for a fact right now that there's one question in my mind on one particular individual that I haven't pulled that deck out for, but I know when I ask that specific person about that specific person, this deck comes to mind because this deck relates to that individual. So if I have a specific question about a specific individual or a specific feeling or thought process that I'm going through, and I know a deck that relates to that, then yeah, I'll go directly to that deck. But if I'm too ambiguous and I'm having too much of a problem fighting myself and being like, oh, I don't know what I want, then it's better for me to just put the decks out and be like, okay, what am I drawn to? Because I'm not focused enough to say I need this particular deck with that particular voice or that particular experience. So yeah, it's a little bit column A, column B, depending on how it is. This one is more
very many of us don't. I was just going to say, most people, once they get into tarot, tend to start accumulating decks.
Yeah.
both the ones you use and the ones you don't use that are just for art. So
It's rare that I have some that I don't use. The very few that I don't use, either A, are very quiet voices that they don't have a lot to say, or it's just a deck that doesn't seem to relate to a lot of people, but I like the artwork. Like, I love my royal tie deck because it's Hindu and Ganesha and very focused on Middle Eastern ideas, but I don't have a lot of people that can relate to here in the Western culture or within my community. So I like the cards, but it's difficult to use them in a reading unless I have a specific question associated towards Ganesha or towards Hinduism or to that particular realm of my mind. So yes, little column A and column B again. Yes, you're right. I have a lot of different decks for different reasons. And it's just trying to figure out what those reasons are. And then again, as you work with the decks together, knowing how, as you piece those, I see it as almost like a puzzle. And the cards are little puzzle pieces, but you get to make the actual picture, the larger picture. Because as you're laying them down, and as much as I'm relating to them as I'm laying them down and placing them, again, when you're finished, looking at them as a whole creates a whole story in itself. The fact that so far, I find it interesting that with the cards I have, a good portion of them are directionally going towards the center again. It's not like a lot of the pictures are looking off and out of the scene. And that tells you a lot too. When you're reading several different decks, looking at the pictures and how they relate. This picture is looking inward, so it's going towards the center. Whereas none of them so far seem to be looking away or out of the picture. This particular card is looking up, which then that also gives me an idea that things are looking up, which is a good sign. I mean, let's face it, I was a little afraid of doing a reading this evening. I thought, oh, am I going to see like the fourth apocalypse and so forth? Right. It's good to see that though there's darkness and though that seems to be a bit of uncertainty and we're still having to keep a distance, and though that there's still a sense of depletion, the things are that there's a chance that there's going to be a refreshing flow of energy and that there's going to be an upkick, an uptake. Let's see if there's another deck that might give a little bit more information. Let's see. All right. I pulled up the Enchanted Map Deck, and this one is an Oracle deck. And oh, this one. Oh, this will be giving me much more clarity. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so with this deck, they have some really great imagery that is this one. Oh, this will be. So this one is, again, not an overly stereotypical tarot deck. It has its own interpretations and how it's set up its version of designation. But the reason why they call it a map is it's supposed to help you map out your life. So we'll see. This one is, again. All right, let's see. Which ones came up? Okay. So in this deck, the card Flying came up, and it's an image of an actual horse with butterfly wings. Another image came up was slow and steady, which is a woman in with fairy wings in a snail shell. There's the moonlight, which has a little fairy on it. And then there's cleaning house. And as I definitely can tell that the flying is going to go there, I think slow and steady should go there. Moonlight. What's moonlight for? That would be good. Okay. Actually, I want to put this one down below. All right. So to make the cards fit, I did shift the central lane. In doing that, it changed the cards, how they're reading. And for me, it makes more sense because, again, if this is the upper portion and it's dealing with flow and nurturing, having the flying horse with the butterfly wings would be absolutely perfect. Because for me, a horse is a sense of power, and the fact that it has wings that it can fly means it has the power to fly. And that's a good idea of how to kind of continue forward, power forward, and think of higher ideas, higher actions, things that are better than ourselves. Although the shifting of the cards has made it interesting because the Fool now is between the male and the female in the water, which that makes me now think that my foolishness was really a battle between my emotions, the feminine, and the concrete world, the masculine. And that's where I was being really foolish, that I shouldn't be fighting them, but that I should have been working with them in a better balance. Which also makes sense when it comes to these two cards. Can you see them? These two cards. Because this one's introspectively looking in masculine wise, but this one, the slow and steady card, is looking out. And looking out. So my subconscious, which I consider to be my feminine, was being slow and steady through the dark time, while my male side was being too introspective and selfish, to be honest. Which also then relates to this card, because the selfishness that I had and I was pulling away in with my animals also pushed people away, which is what continued the alone feeling that I had and made me be even more self-introspective. And as I go further down, when it comes to the depletion that I was feeling, the moonlight makes sense because it was in the dark time of the winter. It was dealing, and the moon is about emotions and fluidity. And again, the fairy in here she's on a balcony. She seems to be entrenched in herself. And I kind of became a little too selfish in my own little world. But what's nice is at the very bottom, it has cleaning house, which means to me that's a turning point. It means I'm at a point where I feel it's time to clean my house. It's time to clean my mind. It's time to clean all the clutter of the depletion and the darkness from the winter and do some spring cleaning. Which then that goes back to the top with the sun, because it's spring and the sun reminds me of the spring. So, and again, the layout has stayed centralized, with just two little offshoots of arms. So I can say that at this point, This reading is very much of a, to be honest, it looks kind of almost like a thick road, like a crossroads, because there's the central core, and then the side views of that central core are on either side and branching off in a crossroads kind of way. And that's where I am right now. My life has been kind of crossroads. So
I'm going to jump in here with a bit of wisdom that I got at a conference. God, I can't even remember when. We were doing dream interpretation. And the interesting thing was one person told a dream in some detail. And every person in the workshop got some kind of message out of the discussion, the exploration of the individual who was randomly picked to talk their dream. I'm going to say, using that logic, everybody who's watching this can look at this tableau you're laying out, and they may be getting different things that relate to how they've done in the last year.
Correct.
Absolutely. Are just as valid, because they are the symbols that are speaking to them. And this layout will speak to everybody in the audience, even as it may be giving a message to you, it'll be giving a different message, what they need to them.
Correct. Absolutely. Because each person, that's again, goes back to how each artist, this art is from their subconscious to bring it into a conscious conversation. I'm just doing the same thing. I'm taking that conscious conversation, using the unconscious communication of imagery, placing that down, making it tactile, so my conscious mind then can have a better dialogue to my subconscious, which everyone else should have that ability too, which is why I call it art therapy, because everyone should be able to relate to some form of imagery that speaks to them, that has that voice that they go, yes, I'm feeling that right now. That's exactly where I'm at right now. And whatever your image and your experience that you bring to that image is perfectly acceptable, because that's where your perspective is. So I do know that as I'm working through this, it may be for, me in a way, but I also know that, as you said, there may be someone else who sees the imagery or the cards and goes, hey, that reminds me of this part of my life, and I relate to it that way. That's awesome. That's perfect. That's the point. It gets dialogue going between your conscious and your subconscious mind. That's the point. And that's where I see it's the therapy. And also non-divinational, because I'm not trying to foresee the future. I'm just trying to relate to the voices of my past and my present, and how those voices in the back of my mind and the foreground of my mind then can have a playground, that they can have a neutral ground to place their thoughts, their theories, their issues and concerns, so that it can be discussed in a neutral and safe fashion. Because there's many times people don't have the lexicon, they don't have the words, or they haven't had the experience to share something that's gone on with their own selves. But cards and artwork and imagery can do that for you. And that's where I see it most helping the psychology of people. So to focus on just one card and be like, I do tarot and I read divination and that's the only way it is, that is one of the ways it can be. I want to see that these can be used as tools for us to deal with, we have so many good and dark voices in our head that we deal with. And there's too many times where you hear people, oh, I just hear my mind going and going and going. Well, if you have a place to put it, you say this now has a place to live. It's one of the things that I loved most about my therapist, when she's like, well, why aren't you writing these things down? Why aren't you putting these down on paper? Why are you keeping it in your head? And it made sense to me. I'm like, why am I keeping it in my head? I'm spending my day sitting there going over all these issues in my head. Whereas once I have some place to put it, it makes it tangible. I can work with it. I can reflect upon it. I can leave it. I can walk away from it, and it's not then taking up time and space and energy in my head rolling around over and over and over. I can look at this, and if I left this up for a few days, I can come to it and reflect and look on it and go, oh, okay, there's more telling me information here, and that I can digest it in a slower fashion and work with it, and know that it's my mind working with me. And that's what I'm hoping that people can use several decks and again work with parts of their brain they haven't been able to before.
So would you say that when we do accumulate these various decks, it's because each of them has something that we need to that it's giving us another voice, another symbol set?
Yes. It gives that voice that didn't know how to speak a way to speak. A good example is whenever I started dealing with some of my childhood issues, what I realized was that some of the childhood issues were prior to me knowing speech. So those voices in my head literally cannot speak because those memories don't have words to attach to them. So I had to give those voices a way to speak without language. And art and cards seem to be the easiest. In fact, the one deck that I'm looking at, there are two decks that came to mind whenever it comes to my child voices that don't have language. And that would be these two decks. So this one's a big deck. All right. And I'll actually show you two decks because they're both related similarly. Come on, get in there. This one comes with a lot of stuff. So this one is called Sacred Geometry. And it's a nice little kit where it gives you a book and a notepad and pencils and so forth. Gives you nice little workshops to work with on it. But what's great about that deck, I just had it, is that it is basic geometry. It is basic, very crop circle, very sacred geometry. Okay.
That reminds me of your artwork.
Oh, thank you. That's one of the things I tend to do quite a bit, is actually a lot of geometry. And let me make more space here. The other deck, oh, I forgot. This one's a cute little deck. They're so totally opposite, but so perfect for a micro macro sense. This deck is called Mentor Spirit, Implementing Change Through Innovative Actions. And the reason why I like this deck is because it's a whole bunch of cards of fractal designs, just absolute little fractal imagery. And they also, for each little fractal they give you, there's a word associated, either decisiveness or harmony, trust, education, caring. So I used these two decks because they're geometry. My child brain, because it didn't have language, still had the basics of geometry. It knew what a circle was, it knew what a triangle was, it knew what a square was. So it's also, to me, a sense of divinity, the divine sacred geometry. Like, no matter what religion you have, the fact is that you understand the circle of the iris of your eye versus the circle of the sun versus the circle of a bubble in your cup of tea. So the circle is a very common shape. It's a very sacred shape. So my child brain relates to that. It's simple, but yet universal. So as I work with these decks, which, okay, quite a few wanted to speak. Pardon?
Do you give special to when they jump out? Do you?
When they jump out, I definitely am like, okay, you meant to come out. All right, fine. We'll let you. What came out was optimism, determination, forgiveness, simplicity, which when I look at what we've already got out, I definitely can say that I do need to do some forgiveness of myself. I definitely feel that there's some determination that needs to occur. I need some optimism and simplicity. Now, where I place those, okay, so I place those right there because they just seem to really fit. Again, just going and looking at how the cards are. And it does seem to be, again, this is more feminine in nature. And so therefore, determination and forgiveness are definitely things that I need to be more nurturing and forgiveness, and being determined and not being afraid to be determined. Whereas on the masculine side, I have the optimism and simplicity. And I have to say that I kind of do need to kind of tell my male side of my brain to calm down, be a little bit more simple, stop being so complicated, and stop being so negative. You know, it does need to be a little bit more optimistic. So those work in the place that they are. Let me see what the bigger cards, the geometry are. That's, oh, I forgot. On the back, they also have, they have these wonderful little designs that they created to match the front of the cards on this particular deck. Again, they were working with crop circles, and I thought that was an interesting concept to mix crop circles with sacred geometry and cards. Why not?
I thought they were wiring diagrams.
Right. That's what they kind of look like, and that's how they kind of describe it. That you're supposed to kind of like wire your brain and use these to recreate different pathways and to look at things in a different light. And oh, so this card came up, which is illusion, and that's what it looks like on the back. This one says it's guilt. And I can definitely say, yeah, okay. Now, as these ones get placed, I'm having the sense to put the larger ones at the base. And since they're at the base, now this is making more of a triangular shape, which kind of makes sense to me because after having a crossway and a cross path, having the shape change into a pyramidal or triangular shape allows me to understand that I'm dealing with me, myself, and I, because I tend to break my triad up into me, myself, and I. And the me side of me feels guilty. The myself side of me tends to feel like I'm illusionary. And yet at the same time, the part of me that is the I, or the sense of self, the ego, is still trying to flow between those two and still try to work through them.
Oh, got another question.
Yes.
Have you ever had your conscious brain try to override what the subconscious is trying to say when you're choosing the placement on the board?
Yeah. It's amazing how part of the issue when you're dealing with human psychology, how we will self-fight ourselves. Our conscious mind is too trained by human society to have specific goals, specific titles, specific definitions of how we should or should not be. Our subconscious doesn't work that way. Our subconscious is very erratic. It's very chaotic. And so, yeah, there are many times where the chaoticness of the subconscious is trying to get the consciousness to let go of its tight definition of a particular situation. And because of our training, we fight it. No, I don't want to believe that. No, I don't want to believe that. How dare you? I was brought up to believe this way. How dare you question my belief system? And our subconscious is going, but you need to. And so, yes, there are times where I have fought my own consciousness because my subconscious has something to tell me, but my consciousness is not ready to hear it. But that's also why I like to leave the tableaus up when I can for a day or two, because in the moment of laying down the cards, my consciousness is always going to bulk and be like, how dare you? But as time goes on and the true communication of my adult goes, now, I know you didn't like hearing that, but let's take an objective view of this. Do we really need to hear this? And then I'm more open to going, okay, let me hear what my subconscious had to say. I'll listen to it. Usually it's right. And that's the thing I hate admitting. My consciousness hates when my subconscious is right. It's like, oh, you were right. I was wrong. I don't like being wrong. But I've learned to allow because my subconscious continuously proves itself to be correct, I've learned through the years to become more reliant upon the subconscious and recognize that my consciousness is just a toddler having a tantrum.
I am going to, which is kind of the reverse of what they usually say. There's the subconscious is the child self, and the superconsciousness is the parent. I'm going to let the audience know why I was laughing so hard, because I have had experiences both personally as the client, and as the person who reads for other people. Mm-hmm. You ask the question and they don't want to hear it, or in my case, I didn't want to hear it. And so you ask the question, you rephrase it to get a different answer, and you get the same answer. And then you rephrase it to get a different answer, and you go to another psychic and you ask the same question and they give you the same answer. Boy, if you don't want to hear it, you do not hear it.
You're absolutely right.
And it's just very funny when I realize, here I am, an experienced reader. I know this, and I still do it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a human.
Mm-hmm. It's human. And again, it's the way we were taught, we were trained. We as humans are so arrogant in our structure of living. We really think it's the best. Like somehow we've come through this all in centuries and that we are the cream of the crop. And we keep forgetting that we're evolving, continuously learning. We're not at the cream of the crop yet. We're only where we are given the limitations that we have at this point. But we have much more to go. We have much more to grow. We have much more evolution to do. So I have to remind myself that that part of my ego that's like, no, I don't want to believe this, is truly the child. It is the child. It is the one who's having a temper tantrum, because it is finite. It is the human part of me that knows it's going to die, compared to the non-corporeal, everlasting, immortal part of me, my spirit, my soul. It's going, yeah, but I'm the subconscious, and I honestly have been around for a few thousand years more than you. And my brain is going, but I know everything because the humans told me I do.
So we are running out of time.
Yes,
so sorry. I want to first put to our wonderful audience, if you have any questions, now is the time to unmute yourself and ask, or put it in the chat. And if you have any final wisdom, anything that you had meant to mention and haven't done it yet.
I pretty much think I've kind of got it all out that needs to be placed, because the whole goal was to introduce people that the cards are part of you as much as they are of the artist, and that we're all connected via our subconscious, and that being able to mix those voices and allow them to speak so that you can understand them is basically the goal, so that you can work with yourself. To use them as different tools than just thinking that you can use them for advancing divination for the future. Work with your own psyche, work with who you are as a person, recognize that we're constantly trying to better ourselves. And this is one of the tools that we can use to better ourselves.
That is, it's a good roundup, and I haven't seen any questions. Nobody seems to have stopped that one, so. I guess that's it. I will thank you very much. I will remind everybody who has come that to tell your friends, remembering that this will be posted in a couple days up on the Changing Times, Changing Worlds YouTube channel, and that you can please come if you haven't done before. Join the Facebook page, Facebook group, the Facebook. We switched it over. Facebook did something, and so Facebook is now, the group is private and the page is public. So announcements all going on the page, and the and you have to join the private group to. We'll try and remember to let you in. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Don't forget that the conference is going to be November 8th to 14th. If people who see this want to request Sheil to teach this again at the conference, then you got to let us know, and then we'll say, hey, come teach us, because I am blown away. I am so going to try this.
Awesome.
So November 8th to 14th. It's going to be virtual again this year because we don't want to take any chances. Future years will probably be hybrid because this has allowed us to reach further. So Monday through Friday will be evening classes, and then Saturday and Sunday will be weekend, the whole weekend, all day long. Thank you again, Jay, Michael, and Sheil and Lord A.S. We all, like the cards, we accumulate names.
Indeed, indeed.
So thank you for joining us, and we will see you later.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope